The planet was a graveyard. Jagged peaks stabbed into the pale lavender sky. Their shadows stretched long across the endless expanse of dust and desolation. Sparse winds stirred, their faint whispers carrying the scent of scorched rock and a metallic tang that seemed to leach into everything, even the thin, suffocating atmosphere. Princess Ilara stumbled over a brittle piece of shale, her bare feet raw and bleeding. She had wrapped them with strips of fabric torn from her gown, once a regal cloth of indigo and silver thread, now a tattered symbol of a life that felt as distant as the stars. In a small alcove carved into the side of a towering rock face, Ilara paused to catch her breath, her slender frame shivering beneath the unforgiving chill. The cold crept into her bones, gnawing at her spirit, yet she dared not make a fire. It would draw attention, possibly deadly attention, and she had nothing left to defend herself with. Her once proud family crest, the emblem of her royal heritage, lay discarded in the dirt somewhere far behind her, a hollow token of a name that no longer held meaning. Ilara's heart twisted as she thought back to her family, her parents, and, most of all, her brother. Younger by only 2 years, he had always been ambitious, but where she had once seen promise, she now recognized the shadow of greed. He wanted the throne, that much was obvious. What she had failed to understand, until it was too late, was just how far he was willing to go to claim it. Their parents had been easily persuaded. She could still see their faces, a blend of apathy and mild regret as her brother wove his poisonous words around them. His silver tongue, honed through years of cunning, had convinced them that Ilara was dangerous, that her quiet intelligence and fierce loyalty to their people made her a threat rather than an asset, and perhaps on some level she could understand their decision. She was too independent, too unwavering in her ideals, and that had always unsettled them. But never in her darkest imaginings had she thought they would abandon her to die on a barren rock, cast away as if she were nothing. The betrayal had come swiftly. She had been sent on what she believed was a diplomatic mission, escorted by a fleet of their finest guards. Only when they had neared this desolate planet had she sensed something amiss. Her guards, once loyal, avoided her gaze, their expressions carefully blank. They had left her with only a single ration pack, a flask of water, and the silence of her mother's parting words echoing in her mind. "You understand, don't you, Ilara? It's better this way." Ilara gritted her teeth against the memory, feeling the familiar surge of anger bubbling beneath her exhaustion. The words "better this way" rang with a kind of cruel detachment she hadn't thought possible from her own mother. Better, she supposed, for them. No rival to threaten her brother's ambition. No lingering shadow of guilt or regret. She forced herself to breathe slowly, each inhale sending a jolt of cold through her lungs. Anger could sustain her, but it was dangerous, a double-edged blade she couldn't wield recklessly. She would need to conserve every shred of energy, every ounce of strength, if she was going to survive. Survival. The word felt foreign, something she had only read about in ancient texts recounting the brutal histories of her planet. Her life had been one of diplomacy, of learning, and of endless lessons in etiquette and responsibility. She had never once been trained to face the brutal edges of the wilderness. Drawing herself upright, Ilara scanned the barren landscape, her sharp, silver eyes picking out potential shelter for the night. The shadows were lengthening, and with them came the bone-chilling cold that turned her skin to ice. She had learned quickly in her first few days here, when darkness fell, the temperature would plummet, and the planet's monstrous creatures would begin their nocturnal hunts. She had seen them from a distance, shadowy figures with multiple limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. They were silent, nearly invisible, and deadly. Ilara's gaze settled on a crevice tucked into the base of a crumbling cliff face, small and shielded enough to offer some protection. She gathered the last of her strength and dragged herself toward it, the cuts on her feet aching with each step. The air was thin, every breath a struggle against the planet's unwelcoming embrace. Her vision blurred, black dots dancing at the edges, but she clenched her jaw, pressing forward. Once inside the crevice, Ilara collapsed onto the rough ground, feeling the scrape of stone against her skin. It was cold, biting into her, but at least it was safe enough anyway. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, just long enough to let the ache in her muscles dull. Her thoughts drifted back, despite herself, to her brother. In her heart she had once believed he loved her, in the distant way siblings do when bound by royal duty rather than shared experience. There had been moments, brief and rare, when she had seen a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. But now, in this stark reality, she understood that his ambition had eclipsed any affection he might have had for her. A shuddering breath escaped her, and she opened her eyes to the harsh world outside her shelter. Her brother's betrayal had taught her one lesson above all else: she was truly, utterly alone. She had no family, no allies, and no resources. Only herself. Days passed in a haze of exhaustion and constant vigilance. She scavenged what little she could find: a bitter plant that grew in the crevices of rocks, water droplets that collected in natural basins during the coldest part of the night. Her strength waned, and each night felt colder, longer, more suffocating. On the seventh day, when she thought her body could take no more, a flicker of light appeared on the horizon. She dismissed it at first, believing it to be a hallucination, a cruel trick of the mind brought on by starvation and despair. But as she watched, the light grew brighter, steady and deliberate, moving across the sky in a sharp arc. It was too controlled, too intentional, to be anything but artificial. A ship. The realization jolted her awake, flooding her limbs with a burst of energy. She scrambled from her shelter, tripping over rocks in her haste, her eyes fixed on the strange vessel as it descended. Her heart raced as she stumbled forward, her voice hoarse from days of silence as she shouted, desperate to be heard. "Please." Here her voice barely carried, a faint sound against the vast expanse. She waved her arms, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and desperation. Whoever they were, whatever they were her only chance. The ship came closer, the light growing brighter until she could make out the distinct shape of its metallic hull, dark against the lavender sky. It landed with a low hum, sending a gust of wind rippling through her hair, stirring the dust around her in swirling patterns. She blinked against the brightness, her eyes stinging, but she forced herself forward, closing the distance as the ramp extended, and a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in dark armor that gleamed under the alien sun, he was human, or at least, he appeared human. His face was rugged, lined with years of experience, his gaze sharp and assessing. He watched her with a mixture of caution and curiosity, as though she were some strange artifact he'd stumbled upon in a foreign land. Behind him, others appeared, similarly dressed, their postures alert, wary. But it was his eyes, warm, unexpectedly kind, that drew her in, a flicker of something she had thought long lost. The man spoke, his voice low and firm, yet carrying a note of compassion. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. After days of solitude, the sound of another voice was almost overwhelming. But as she looked into his eyes, she felt a surge of defiance rise within her, a fierce reminder of who she was, of what they had taken from her. "I am Princess Alara," she said, her voice strong, each syllable a reclamation of her identity. "And I have been abandoned." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the soft hum of the ship and the gentle rustle of the alien wind. The man, this stranger, nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Then you're coming with us," he replied. And with those simple words, the harsh wilderness around her faded. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was not alone. The inside of the ship was a dim maze of metal corridors, softly illuminated by pale blue emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Princess Alara followed Colonel Marcus in silence, her gaze absorbing every detail of her surroundings with a blend of awe and wariness. The walls gleamed in smooth alloys she didn't recognize, each corridor sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the palace she'd once called home. The ship thrummed softly beneath her feet, alive with power and purpose, carrying them far from the barren rock that had been her prison. Colonel Marcus glanced over his shoulder, as if to ensure she was still there. His sharp eyes, deeply intelligent yet shadowed by something she couldn't quite name, assessed her in quick, thoughtful glances. He had given her water when she'd first boarded, and a blanket that now draped across her shoulders. Despite his hardened appearance, there was an unexpected gentleness to him, a quiet assurance in his movements that had calmed her in a way she hadn't expected. "Here," he said, leading her to a small room, sparse but clean, with a narrow bed against one wall and a small table bolted to the floor. He stood in the doorway, studying her as though trying to gauge her reaction. "This is kind of you," Ilara said, her voice rough from disuse. She tried to inject a note of gratitude into her tone, but her mind was still reeling from the whirlwind of events. Just hours ago, she'd thought herself doomed to die in the wilderness, and now she stood in the sterile confines of a human ship, surrounded by people who knew nothing of her world, her pain, or her purpose. Marcus nodded. "We'll set a course back to Earth soon. You can rest here until then." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Once we're underway, I'd like to hear your story." She hesitated, the enormity of her own tale almost overwhelming her. But she nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you." With a curt nod, Marcus stepped back and closed the door, leaving her alone in the quiet room. Ilara sank onto the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her skin, loosening muscles that had been taut with tension for days, and she felt her body begin to tremble. The truth of her situation crashed over her like a wave: the betrayal, the isolation, the bitterness of being cast aside by her own family, and now the strange, tentative hope sparked by these humans. She lay down, her head sinking into the thin pillow, and let exhaustion overtake her. For the first time since she'd been left on that planet, sleep claimed her without the terror of night creatures lurking in the shadows or the unrelenting cold. Hours later, she awoke to a soft knock on her door. She sat up, blinking against the artificial light that filled her room. She felt disoriented, still caught between the nightmares of her family's betrayal and the reality of her present surroundings. Before she could respond, the door opened and Marcus stepped inside, followed by a woman with striking, dark eyes and close-cropped hair. "This is Lieutenant Kara Tarlow," Marcus said. "She's our medic and has come to check on you. We weren't sure what your condition was when we found you." Ilara managed a nod, watching as Kara approached her with a med scanner in hand. Kara's gaze was sharp, but there was kindness in her eyes, a gentle compassion that Ilara hadn't encountered since her exile. Kara held the scanner over Ilara's arm, the device emitting a soft hum. "You're dehydrated and malnourished, but nothing a few days of rest and good food won't fix," she said, her tone brisk but reassuring. "I'll have some supplements brought to you." "Thank you," Ilara replied softly. She looked down at her hands, noticing for the first time how thin they had become, how the skin stretched over her knuckles. Marcus cleared his throat, drawing her attention back to him. "When you're ready, I'd like to talk. I want to understand what happened to you, why you were left on that planet." Ilara took a deep breath, the weight of his words pressing against her heart. She hadn't told anyone the full truth, hadn't let herself feel the depth of her anger and grief since it had happened. But something in Marcus's steady gaze and calm presence invited her to trust him, and, more than that, to trust herself. "I can tell you now," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. She glanced at Kara, who gave her a small nod of encouragement before stepping back to let them talk. Marcus sat on the edge of the small table, folding his arms as he regarded her with an intensity that both unsettled and reassured her. "Take your time," he said simply. Ilara clasped her hands, her fingers twisting together as she searched for the words. "I am Princess Ilara of the House of Adan." Or I was she paused, swallowing against the sudden tightness in her throat. "My family, the royal family, cast me aside. They left me on that barren planet because they see me as a threat to my younger brother's ascension to the throne." Marcus's brow furrowed, and he exchanged a brief glance with Kara, who had taken a seat near the door. "A threat?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Ilara nodded, bitterness edging into her voice. "My brother Eric has always been ambitious. He was born second but believes he deserves the throne. He convinced my parents that my presence would destabilize his rule, that I would pose a challenge to his authority." She laughed bitterly. "So they took the easiest solution, they abandoned me." The silence that followed was thick with tension, Marcus's gaze dark and contemplative as he took in her words. "They just left you there? Your own family?" "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "They arranged for a fake diplomatic mission, sent me with a group of guards, and then left me to die." Her throat tightened as she remembered the looks of her parents, the indifference in their eyes as she was led away. Kara shook her head, disgust flickering across her face. "That's monstrous," she said, a rare crack in her otherwise controlled demeanor. "To treat their own flesh and blood like that, it's unthinkable." Ilara managed a small, sad smile. "Where I come from, power means everything. Family ties are secondary to ambition, to the desire for control. My brother learned that well. He's cunning, persuasive. He knew exactly what strings to pull to turn them against me." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intent. "So what now? What do you want to do?" The question lingered in the air, filling her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She held his gaze, letting the answer settle within her. "I want justice," she said, her voice a quiet storm. "I want to return home not to reclaim the throne, but to expose the truth. My brother may have the throne, but he won't hold it unchallenged. Not anymore." A flicker of admiration crossed Marcus's face, quickly masked by his usual stoicism. He gave a single nod. "Then we'll help you." The simplicity of his words took her by surprise. "You don't even know me," she said, almost in disbelief. "You owe me nothing." Marcus shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe, but I know betrayal. I know what it's like to lose trust in people you should be able to rely on." His eyes softened, a brief glimpse of the pain he carried, hidden beneath his resolute exterior. "And no one deserves to be left alone." Ilara's heart twisted, caught off guard by the sincerity in his words. "Thank you, Colonel." "Call me Marcus," he said with a slight smile, a touch of warmth that made her feel, for a fleeting moment, as if she were no longer adrift in the cold vastness of space. Over the next few days, as the ship hurtled through the stars toward Earth, Ilara began to feel a tentative sense of safety. Marcus's crew treated her with a mix of respect and curiosity, though some kept their distance, unsure of the strange alien princess in their midst. Yet every interaction seemed to chip away at the walls she had built around herself, each act of kindness and respect rekindling a glimmer of hope. Marcus spent hours speaking with her, sharing tales of Earth and his own life. His stories were tinged with a quiet resilience, stories of battles and loss, of moments where he'd questioned his loyalty to the very institution he served. Ilara found herself opening up in turn, sharing memories of her planet's golden forests, the elegant spires of the palace, and the childhood games she'd once played with Eric before ambition had twisted him into something unrecognizable. It was in these quiet moments, as they sat across from each other in the ship's small mess hall, or spoke in hushed voices during the quiet of night, that she began to understand him. He was a man who had given himself fully to his duty, yet somewhere along the way, he'd lost faith in the things he fought for. And now, despite all logic, he had chosen to fight for her, a princess from a distant world. Their bond deepened in these stolen moments, an understanding growing between them, a mutual respect, and a quiet, unspoken promise that neither would abandon the other. When they finally neared Earth, Marcus assembled his crew, explaining their plan. They would land on a restricted base and approach Earth's Defense Council with Ilara's story. They would need to gather allies, build a case, and prepare for the long, arduous journey back to her home planet. The task was monumental, nearly impossible. But as Ilara stood beside Marcus, watching the blue-green sphere of Earth appear on the horizon, she felt something stir within her, a spark of determination, a hope rekindled. She glanced at Marcus, meeting his steady gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and sure. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "We're in this together now, Ilara. We'll get you the justice you deserve." And as they descended toward Earth, Ilara felt, for the first time in her life, that she was not only fighting for her own survival, but for a future where loyalty could triumph over betrayal, where bonds of trust could be built from the ruins of loss. The steady hum of the ship's engines filled the silence, a low, comforting vibration that seemed to soothe even the frayed edges of Princess Ilara's mind. She had spent her life surrounded by the refined, opulent silence of palace walls, but this mechanical heartbeat, thrumming with purpose, had become a welcome reprieve. As they cut through the endless dark toward Earth, Ilara felt the heavy weight of her past slipping further behind her, though shadows of her family's betrayal still lingered in her thoughts, dark and unyielding. Colonel Marcus, her stalwart guide through this strange new world, had left her to rest in her quarters after their last conversation, understanding the weight of everything she'd endured. But as she lay in the dim room, sleep eluded her. The memories of her family's cold indifference and her brother's calculating smile seemed to taunt her, a reminder of how close she had come to being erased entirely. With a sigh, Alara rose, the blanket falling away from her shoulders, and made her way down the quiet, dimly lit corridors of the ship. She had begun to memorize its layout: narrow metal corridors, lined with sturdy doors that concealed various chambers, storage rooms, and the quarters of the crew members who had saved her. It was an unfamiliar world of technology and efficiency, a far cry from the delicate artistry of her palace with its carved columns and glowing crystal walls. On to a faint light spilling from the open door of the mess hall, she stepped inside. Marcus was seated alone at one of the tables, his back straight, hands wrapped around a mug of steaming liquid. He looked up at her approach, his dark eyes softened by the low light. The sight of him alone, looking weary and contemplative, brought a strange sense of companionship bubbling to the surface of her chest. In him, she recognized something she had never seen in her family: a quiet, unspoken loyalty, something forged through shared hardship rather than blood. "Couldn't sleep either?" Marcus asked, his voice low and unassuming. She shook her head, moving closer, her fingers brushing the metal surface of the table as she took a seat across from him. "The quiet makes it difficult to stop thinking," she admitted. "And there's a great deal to think about." He nodded, taking a sip from his mug before setting it down. "That's understandable. You've been through hell." His eyes flicked to hers, steady and grounding. "But you're here now. We're on our way to Earth. And once we get there, we'll be able to start planning." The words brought a swell of hope that made her chest feel uncomfortably tight. "I keep waiting for this to be a dream," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep expecting to wake up on that cold, empty planet, or worse, in my family's palace, where I'm nothing more than a pawn in my brother's game." Marcus leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You're more than a pawn, Alara. And your brother doesn't get to decide that anymore. Not while I'm here." The promise in his voice was fierce, as if he were reassuring not only her but himself. For a moment they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The hum of the engines and the soft clink of the ship's metal joints settling filled the empty space between them. Then, as if sensing her desire for distraction, Marcus began to talk. "I've seen betrayal before, he said, his voice quiet. "Not like yours, maybe, but enough to know what it does to people, to know that it leaves scars you carry long after the wounds have closed." Alara studied him, the rough planes of his face cast in shadow and light, and realized how little she knew of him beyond the stoic loyalty and quiet strength he had shown her. "What happened?" she asked, genuinely curious. She wanted to understand this man who had risked so much for her, a stranger. Marcus's gaze was distant, as if looking at something far beyond the confines of the ship. "I was part of a unit, a close-knit team of soldiers. We fought together, survived together, we trusted each other." His mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "But there was one mission, a covert operation, where everything went wrong. Our leader made a decision, a terrible decision that sacrificed half our team to save his own skin. When we found out," he shook his head, the memories too dark to voice. Alara felt a pang of empathy, understanding now the haunted look she had sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. That must have been devastating. It was, he admitted, a rare openness softening his voice. "After that, it was hard to trust anyone. I've spent years keeping people at a distance, refusing to let them get close." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "But with you, Alara, it feels different. You've been betrayed in a way no one should have to endure. And yet, you're still standing, still fighting." She took a deep breath, his words warming a place in her heart she hadn't realized was so cold. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We'll get through this together." The warmth of his words lingered as they talked late into the night, trading stories of their lives, their cultures, and the things that had shaped them. Marcus told her of Earth's blue oceans, its towering cities, and the vibrant patchwork of cultures that populated his world. In return, Alara spoke of her planet, of the shimmering forests that glowed with bioluminescent flora, and the palace's crystalline towers that caught the starlight and reflected it in dazzling patterns across the capital city. The following days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Alara spent time learning the intricacies of human technology, fascinated by the gadgets and systems that Marcus's crew took for granted. The crew members had warmed to her, each drawn to her regal bearing and quiet determination. Some taught her basic combat moves, others shared stories of Earth's varied cultures, eager to introduce her to the traditions and customs of their home. But in the quiet hours, when the ship seemed to breathe with a life of its own, Alara and Marcus would talk. They discussed strategy, the complexities of her family's political web, and the allies and enemies she would likely face. Marcus's insight was invaluable, his mind sharp and tactical, probing each scenario until they had crafted a plan with as few weak points as possible. One evening, as they reviewed the complex hierarchy of her family's court, Alara glanced at him, a question pressing on her mind. "Marcus, why are you helping me? Truly?" He looked at her, a shadow of a smile on his face. "Because you're worth fighting for, Alara. You've been wronged, and you're fighting to set it right." That's the kind of battle I can stand behind. His gaze softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his composed exterior. "Besides, I believe in you." His words settled over her, a warm blanket against the chill of her fears. She felt a spark of something between them, something unspoken yet powerful. In his presence, she felt not only safe but seen, recognized for who she was beneath the titles and betrayal. As they neared Earth, a faint, glowing orb in the distance, Marcus gathered the crew in the mess hall for a final briefing. Alara stood by his side, the gravity of their mission weighing heavily on her shoulders. "All right," Marcus began, his tone commanding. "We're close to Earth, but this won't be a simple homecoming. We'll be landing at a restricted base and meeting with the Earth Defense Council. They'll want to know who Alara is and why we're risking so much for her." He glanced at her, a silent nod of reassurance. "But I trust her, and I expect all of you to do the same." The crew nodded, murmuring their agreement. Alara felt a rush of gratitude for these humans who, without obligation, had chosen to stand by her side. She met each of their gazes, her voice steady. "I know that I'm asking a great deal of you, all of you, but I promise that my cause is just. My family's betrayal is a crime that extends beyond myself. It is a threat to the integrity of our royal line, to the people who look to us for leadership." A solemn silence settled over the group, broken only by the low hum of the engines. Finally, one of the crew members, a wiry man named Lieutenant Jensen, spoke up. "We're with you, Princess," he said, a firm resolve in his voice. "If Marcus trusts you, then so do we." The others voiced their agreement, and Alara felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she was missing. They would fight for her, not as subjects to a queen, but as allies standing beside her in her quest for justice. When Earth finally filled the viewport, Alara's breath caught in her throat. The planet was a breathtaking swirl of blue and green, its surface a living mosaic of oceans, forests, and deserts, unlike anything she had ever seen. She pressed her hand against the glass, mesmerized by its beauty. Marcus watched her, a quiet smile on his face. "It's something, isn't it?" "It's more than I ever imagined," she whispered, awe in her voice. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the blue skies stretched out before them, brilliant and endless. She felt the ship shudder as it descended, the friction of re-entry setting the hull aglow. The sight of distant mountains and vast oceans brought a strange ache to her heart, a longing for a place she had never known. They touched down at a secluded military base, far from prying eyes. As the engines powered down, Marcus took her hand, a gesture of solidarity that steadied her nerves. "Remember, Alara," he murmured, "you are not alone." She met his gaze, feeling the weight of his promise settle within her. "I know," she replied, her voice firm. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." With a final nod, they stepped off the ship together, her footsteps solid and resolute on Earth's soil. She knew that what lay ahead would be difficult, but as she looked into the faces of her newfound allies, she felt a glimmer of hope that her fight was not only possible but worth every risk. The journey toward justice had begun, and she would face it with the strength of an alliance forged in loyalty, compassion, and trust. And in that moment, beneath the vast skies of a new world, Ilara felt, perhaps for the first time, that she had truly found a place where she belonged. The air was brisk and laced with the scent of pine as Ilara stepped onto Earth's soil, her boots sinking slightly into the dew-damp ground. They had landed under the cover of night, the stars scattered above like ancient diamonds. Around her, the imposing shapes of Earth's military hangars rose, their sharp lines softened by the faint mist curling through the air. For a moment, she simply stood there, feeling the strange yet grounding sensation of solid earth beneath her feet, so different from the barren expanse of her desolate exile and the crystalline marble floors of her childhood palace. Colonel Marcus stood beside her, a silent sentinel, his gaze steady as he took in the surroundings. They were accompanied by his crew, who had been unwavering in their support since the beginning, yet Ilara could sense the tension in the air. This was the critical juncture, the point where her story would be laid bare before strangers, who would judge her worth and the merit of her cause. Reddy Marcus's voice was calm, almost gentle. It grounded her, giving her the strength she needed. "Yes," she replied, her tone steady. "Let's go." They moved as a unit, a team now accustomed to each other's steps, through the complex toward a grand, reinforced building. Marcus had explained that it housed the Earth Defense Council, a coalition of Earth's highest-ranking leaders and military strategists. They were the ones with the power to support her, to lend the resources and allies she would need to reclaim her rightful place and expose her family's treachery. As they entered, Ilara's heart raced, the echo of her footsteps amplifying the rising tension within her. The hall was vast and intimidating, with high, arched ceilings and walls lined with the portraits of Earth's past leaders, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. The council members were seated in a semicircle at the far end of the room, a collection of stern faces marked by experience and age. Each of them wore the uniform of their rank, their gazes sharp and assessing. At the center sat General Wallace, an imposing man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He was known throughout Earth's military for his cunning and his willingness to make difficult decisions, regardless of cost. It was he who held the final say on matters involving extraterrestrial alliances, and Ilara could sense his skepticism as he watched her approach. Colonel Marcus stepped forward, giving a respectful salute. "General Wallace, council members," he began, his tone formal yet firm. "This is Princess Ilara of the House of Adan. She is here seeking our support, not just as allies, but as friends, in a mission of justice." General Wallace's gaze turned to Ilara, assessing her with an intensity that seemed to penetrate her very soul. "We have read your initial briefing, Colonel," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but now we need to hear it from her." Ilara took a steadying breath and stepped forward, her posture regal, her voice unwavering. "Honorable Council, I come to you with a tale of betrayal and treachery, of a family who would sacrifice their own to consolidate power. My family abandoned me, casting me onto a desolate planet to die, all to secure my brother's path to the throne. I am here to expose the truth and restore justice not just for myself, but for the people of my world, who deserve a ruler worthy of their loyalty." A murmur ran through the room, the council members exchanging skeptical glances. Ilara felt the weight of their scrutiny, the silent judgment of 1,000 unspoken questions. But Marcus remained steady beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. "What guarantee do we have?" asked a council member, a woman with sharp features and eyes like steel, "that this is not simply a power struggle, a vendetta against your own kin? We've seen such conflicts spiral into ruin." Ilara met her gaze, allowing her vulnerability to show, letting them see the truth of her pain. "It would be a lie to say there is no anger in my heart. But my desire is not for revenge, but for justice. If my brother takes the throne, he will rule with lies, with cruelty and betrayal as his tools. He has no loyalty to our people, only a desire for power. I wish to see a world where our people are led with dignity and honor." A quiet fell over the room, her words hanging heavy in the air. General Wallace leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table before him. "Colonel Marcus has vouched for you, Princess. He believes in your cause and has spoken of your strength, your resilience. But belief alone won't win this battle. If we choose to support you, it will come at a cost. Our resources, our soldiers will be at risk. I need to know without any doubt. that you are committed, that you will fight not just for yourself, but for those who choose to fight alongside you." Ilara nodded, her expression fierce, the fire of determination lighting her gaze. "I am committed, General Wallace. I have lost everything, but I have gained something more valuable: hope. I will not turn back until justice is served." After a moment, the general inclined his head, a small sign of approval. "Then let us begin preparations." Over the following days, Ilara found herself training with Marcus's team, learning Earth's methods of combat, familiarizing herself with their technology and tactics. It was a new language, a different kind of discipline, but she took to it with fierce dedication. Her body, still weak from her time on the desolate planet, protested at first, her muscles aching as she practiced with Earth's weapons, learned their fighting techniques, and absorbed the nuances of their strategy. One day, as she sparred with Marcus in a makeshift training room, he paused, watching her with a look of admiration. "You're a fast learner," he commented, his voice low and appreciative. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her chest heaving. "I have to be," she replied, her tone resolute. "There's no other option." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the ship's equipment the only sound. Then Marcus's gaze softened, and he took a step closer. "Ilara," he began, his voice quiet, almost hesitant, "I need you to know something. This mission ... it's become more than just duty for me." She looked up at him, her heart racing, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his eyes. "You've given me a purpose I didn't know I was missing," he continued. "I didn't expect to find someone like you out there, someone who would ... remind me of why I fight." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a tentative yet undeniable connection forming between them. "You've shown me what true loyalty looks like, Marcus," she said, her voice soft. "I thought I'd lost that forever." For a moment, they stood there, their gazes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. It was a fragile, unspoken promise, a bond that transcended words. And in that moment, Ilara realized that she was no longer fighting alone. When the council's preparations were finally complete, Ilara and her allies gathered in a briefing room, their faces solemn as they reviewed the intricate web of strategy they had crafted. The Earth Defense Council had agreed to lend her a specialized task force, a group of Earth's most elite soldiers trained in covert operations, diplomacy, and combat. Together they would infiltrate her home planet, exposing her brother's treachery and rallying those who still held loyalty to her family's ideals of honor and justice. Lieutenant Kara Tarlo, the medic who had cared for Ilara upon her rescue, would serve as her primary contact, handling communications and medical needs. Jensen, the wiry lieutenant who had first vouched for her, would lead reconnaissance, using his skills in stealth and strategy to locate potential allies among her people. And then, of course, there was Marcus. He would be by her side, her protector and advisor, his steady presence a source of unshakable confidence. As they finalized the details of their plan, Marcus looked at her, his gaze intense. "This won't be easy, Ilara. Once we set foot on your planet, there's no turning back." She met his gaze, her voice calm, her conviction unshakable. "I know, but I am ready. I have been ready since the moment they left me to die." The day of their departure dawned clear and cold, the morning light filtering through the vast hangar as Ilara and her allies prepared for the journey. Earth's military had provided them with a stealth ship, its sleek, matte surface designed to avoid detection by her family's patrols. They would slip onto her planet undetected, reaching the capital under the cover of night. Ilara stood on the tarmac, taking a moment to absorb the gravity of the mission ahead. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the solid earth beneath her, grounding herself in the purpose that had carried her through betrayal and despair. Beside her, Marcus watched, his gaze filled with a quiet strength. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a steady anchor. She nodded, opening her eyes, a fierce determination burning within her. "Yes," she replied, her voice a whisper of steel. "I am." Together they boarded the stealth ship, each member of her team taking their places as they settled in for the journey. Ilara's heart pounded as the engines hummed to life, the sensation of movement carrying her back toward the place she had once called home and the people who had betrayed her. As they ascended through Earth's atmosphere, the blue skies faded to black, the stars unfolding around them in a vast, glittering tapestry. Alara watched, her gaze fixed on the distant star that marked her home, a fire of purpose igniting within her. She was no longer the abandoned princess, the forgotten daughter. She was a warrior, a leader, a beacon of justice, and with Marcus and her newfound allies by her side, she would reclaim her place and restore the honor that her family had sought to destroy. And as the ship hurtled through the endless void, Alara felt a sense of peace settle within her, a calm resolve that carried her forward. She was no longer fighting for herself alone. She was fighting for her people, for the values she had held dear, and for the trust she had found in those who stood beside her. The journey had begun, and Alara knew that whatever awaited her, she was ready. The stealth ship sliced silently through the dense clouds above her home planet, the darkened landscape stretching beneath them in a jagged mosaic of stone, sand, and crystalline cities glowing faintly in the distance. Alara peered through the viewport, her heart tight with a mixture of dread and resolve. The beauty of her world, once a source of pride and comfort, now felt tainted, each spire and shadow a reminder of the betrayal that had fractured her life. Colonel Marcus stood beside her, his gaze steady, radiating a calm assurance that had become her lifeline. Their team, a collection of Earth's elite soldiers, covert operatives, and strategists, sat behind them, tense yet alert, each face a mask of focused determination. This was no simple mission. They were entering the heart of an empire where power was worshipped, where loyalty was a rare commodity, and where truth was often the first casualty. "We're approaching the drop zone," Jensen murmured, his voice low, his eyes never leaving the radar screen. "The palace's shields are operational, but our cloaking tech should hold. We'll be in and out of their scans before they can detect us." Alara took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Thank you, Jensen," she said softly, her voice firm. "Everyone, thank you. This mission, it's not just my fight. It's a fight for justice, for the lives my family has trampled in their pursuit of power." The members of her team nodded, their faces filled with a grim respect. Marcus's hand found her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, and she felt a rush of warmth that grounded her. "Remember," he said quietly, his voice filled with quiet strength, "we're with you, no matter what." She nodded, grateful for the fierce loyalty in his gaze. "Let's go." They landed in a secluded canyon on the outskirts of the capital, shielded from prying eyes by the towering rock formations. The team moved quickly, exiting the ship and blending seamlessly into the shadowed landscape. Marcus led the way, his military precision evident in every movement, and Alara followed, each step bringing her closer to the palace and to the reckoning that awaited her. Their plan was complex, each layer carefully designed to outwit the surveillance, guards, and political allies that fortified her brother's rule. Alara had studied the maps of the palace tirelessly, each hall and chamber etched into her memory from years spent navigating its intricate layout. But her return would not be a quiet infiltration. She needed to make a statement, a move bold enough to capture the attention of the entire court, to force her family into the light where their lies would be exposed. They moved swiftly through the canyon, reaching a concealed entrance in the palace's lower chambers, a forgotten passage she had used as a child, a secret known only to the royal family. As she approached the doorway, memories surged back, memories of laughter and innocence, now soured by the knowledge of her family's betrayal. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the entry panel, the weight of her past pressing against her. Sensing her hesitation, Marcus stepped beside her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice gentle yet strong. She met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "Yes, this is the only way." With a swift movement, she activated the panel, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. They entered a narrow corridor, dark and silent, the air thick with the scent of dust and disuse. Alara led the way, her steps sure as they made their way toward the central halls where her family would be gathered. The palace was filled with a quiet grandeur, its walls gleaming with the soft glow of crystal and bioluminescent flora woven into intricate tapestries. It was beautiful, achingly familiar, yet every polished surface and gilded edge felt like a facade, a hollow echo of a family that had traded honor for ambition. Ilara's jaw tightened as she moved through the halls, her team following in disciplined silence, each of them keenly aware of the danger surrounding them. They stopped outside the grand hall where, as Ilara had anticipated, a court session was in progress. Her brother, Prince Eric, was addressing the gathered nobles, his voice carrying a tone of charisma and confidence that had always drawn people to him. She felt a surge of anger, a bitter reminder of the charm that had hidden his cruelty, that had convinced their parents to abandon her. Turning to Marcus and the team, she took a steadying breath. "I need you all to remain out of sight until the signal," she whispered. "This moment must be public, undeniable." Marcus gave her a single nod, his expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. "We'll be right here, Ilara." With a final glance at him, she squared her shoulders and pushed open the doors to the grand hall. The hall fell into stunned silence as Ilara entered, her figure framed by the massive doors, her presence a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the courtiers surrounding her brother. Gasps and murmurs filled the air, faces turning pale as they recognized her, the princess who had been presumed dead, erased from the family's history, as if she had never existed. Prince Eric's face froze, his eyes widening with shock, and for a brief moment she saw fear flicker across his features. But he recovered quickly, his expression twisting into a mask of disdain as he stepped forward, his voice dripping with feigned surprise. Well, he drawled, his tone mocking. "Look who's returned from the grave. Sister, we all thought you lost." Ilara's gaze was steely, her voice ringing out clear and strong, filling the vast hall. "Spare me the lies, Eric. We both know you and our parents left me to die." A shocked silence rippled through the room, courtiers exchanging scandalized glances, their loyalty teetering as the tension crackled in the air. Eric's eyes narrowed, the charm slipping from his expression to reveal the cold malice beneath. "Old accusations, sister," he replied smoothly, his voice deceptively calm. "But the people of our kingdom have little tolerance for baseless rumors." Ilara's eyes blazed with a fierce determination as she stepped forward, unafraid, her voice unshakable. "Baseless? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you sent me on a diplomatic mission without guards, without resources, abandoning me on a planet with no means of survival." Eric's smile faltered, a flicker of unease breaking through his mask. But before he could respond, Ilara raised her hand, signaling Marcus and the team. The doors burst open, and Marcus strode in, flanked by his soldiers, their presence a commanding force that silenced any whispers of dissent. They took their positions behind Ilara, their loyalty and support visible for all to see. "My brother," she continued, her voice carrying through the hall, "has twisted the royal family's legacy. He has betrayed not only me but the values we were raised to uphold. He used his influence to deceive our parents, to cast me aside as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. But today that ends." Her words struck the courtiers like a hammer, the weight of truth rippling through the room. She saw faces turn from shock to fury, whispers escalating as the realization of Eric's betrayal dawned on them. Some of the nobles who had once supported him began to step back, their allegiance wavering in the face of his deceit. Eric's composure broke, his face twisting into a snarl. "Enough," he shouted, his voice edged with desperation. "You come here with outsiders, with these humans, and you expect us to believe your lies. You are nothing but a traitor." Ilara met his gaze, unflinching, her voice laced with cold defiance. "No, Eric. I am the rightful heir, the one who remained loyal to our people when you turned your back on them. And I am here to restore the honor you have stolen." At her words, General Wallace, who had been watching from the back of the hall, stepped forward, his Earth Defense Council insignia gleaming on his uniform. "Prince Eric," he said, his tone authoritative, "we have confirmed Princess Ilara's claims. Your actions have been recorded and verified. This court stands as witness." Eric's face drained of color, his eyes darting around the room, seeking allies among the nobles. But they had turned from him, their expressions grim, their loyalty shifting in favor of Ilara's truth. He stumbled back, the reality of his defeat sinking in. Ilara stepped forward, her gaze unyielding. "You have betrayed your family, your kingdom, and our people. And for that, you will answer to them." A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd, the nobles nodding, their faith in her slowly rekindling as they saw the strength and integrity in her bearing. She raised her hand, signaling the guards, who stepped forward and took hold of her brother, their grips firm as they led him away. Eric struggled, his defiance breaking into anger, but he was powerless against the tide of justice that had risen against him. As he was taken from the hall, Alara turned to face the assembled court, her voice calm yet filled with purpose. "My people, I know I have been gone, and that my family's silence has left wounds that may never fully heal. But I am here now. I promise to restore our kingdom, to lead with the honor and dignity that was once our pride." The nobles knelt, one by one, their heads bowed in respect, their voices murmuring their loyalty to their true queen. The sight filled Alara with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't realized she'd been missing, a vindication not only of her right to rule, but of the belief that had carried her through every hardship. Marcus approached her, his eyes filled with quiet pride, and as she looked into his gaze, she felt a profound warmth blossom within her. He had been her strength, her unwavering companion in the face of impossible odds. And now, in the presence of her people, she found herself reaching for his hand, a silent promise between them. With Marcus by her side and the support of Earth's allies, Alara stood as queen, her spirit a beacon of justice and resilience. Together they would build a future where loyalty and truth prevailed, a future where betrayal could be overcome by the bonds forged through trust and compassion. And as she looked out over her people, her heart filled with the knowledge that she was no longer alone, that she had found not only her rightful place but a purpose far greater than the crown itself. A new era had dawned, one marked by unity and hope, and Alara knew that with Marcus by her side, she would lead her people into a brighter tomorrow. The morning sun rose over the capital, casting its golden light over the palace's gleaming towers, bathing the crystal spires in an ethereal glow. The entire city seemed to hold its breath, as if honoring the moment of Alara's ascension to the throne. She stood at the balcony of her new chambers, her gaze sweeping across the landscape she had once called home, now seen through new eyes and with a renewed purpose. The city lay before her in a state of eager anticipation, a kingdom awaiting its queen. Behind her, Marcus stepped into the chamber, his footsteps quiet as he approached. His presence had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat, his loyalty a source of strength that had carried her through every challenge. Today, however, there was something different in the air, a tension, a sense of expectation that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. "Your Majesty," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he offered a small, formal bow, his voice edged with a playful note. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Marcus, if you call me that one more time, I may have to rethink our alliance." His eyes gleamed with amusement as he straightened. "Understood, Your Majesty," he said again, a mischievous glint in his gaze. She laughed, a sound that felt foreign and yet wonderfully freeing after the weight of recent events. She realized that in his presence, the title meant little, that he saw her not just as the queen, but as Alara, the woman who had fought against betrayal, who had risked everything for justice, and who had found a sense of belonging and purpose far greater than any crown. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly, her voice filled with the sincerity of 1,000 unspoken words. "I couldn't have done this without you." He stepped closer, his expression softening, the playfulness giving way to something deeper. "And I wouldn't have missed this journey for anything. Alara, you've given me a purpose I never knew I was searching for." They stood in silence for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but in that shared glance, they both knew that they would face it together. Later that day, Alara was crowned in a ceremony that combined the ancient traditions of her people with the presence of Earth's delegation. General Wallace and other Earth dignitaries stood as honored guests, a symbol of the newfound alliance between their two worlds. The throne room was filled with nobles, citizens, and soldiers alike, all witnessing the dawn of a new era as Alara ascended the throne, her face calm, her posture regal, embodying the strength she had found within herself. As the high priestess placed the crown upon her head, Alara felt the weight of her title settle over her not as a burden, but as a responsibility she was finally ready to bear. She looked out over her people, her gaze steady, her heart filled with a sense of purpose that went far beyond power or vengeance. "My people," she began, her voice carrying through the grand hall, each word infused with the fire of her conviction. "Today marks the beginning of a new era. We stand not only as a kingdom but as part of a united galaxy. We have forged an alliance with Earth, a world that has shown us friendship, loyalty, and courage. Together we will rebuild, we will honor justice, and we will ensure that every citizen of our world is valued and respected." The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of approval and hope filling the room. Alara felt their support, their belief in her, and it fueled her resolve. She saw the faces of her people, their expressions marked by relief, pride, and for the first time in a long time, hope. She was no longer the abandoned princess, nor just the queen who had reclaimed her throne. She was a leader, a symbol of resilience and unity. As the ceremony concluded and the guests began to disperse, Alara was approached by the representatives from Earth. General Wallace extended his hand in a gesture of respect, his gaze filled with the quiet approval of one who understood the weight of leadership. "You have shown great courage, Queen Alara," he said, his voice steady. "Earth is proud to stand by your side, and we look forward to a future of mutual prosperity." Alara shook his hand, her expression one of gratitude. "Thank you, General. Your support has been invaluable, and I am honored to call Earth our ally." They exchanged a nod of mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them together. It was a partnership forged not just by politics, but by shared values, a desire for justice, a commitment to loyalty, and the understanding that true strength lay in unity. Marcus joined her side as the dignitaries departed, his expression contemplative as he watched the Earth delegation leave the hall. "A few months ago," he murmured, his voice soft enough for only her to hear, "I would never have believed this was possible. Two worlds, so different, standing together as equals." Alara looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. "Neither would I," she admitted, "but perhaps that's the power of hope, the ability to see beyond our own limitations, to imagine a future that seems impossible." He met her gaze, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You taught me that, Alara. You showed me that hope is more than just a feeling, it's a force, a catalyst for change. And now, we're building something that will outlast us both." In the weeks that followed, Alara and Marcus worked tirelessly to solidify the new alliance between her kingdom and Earth. Diplomats traveled between worlds, sharing knowledge, resources, and ideas that would benefit both civilizations. Trade routes were established, technology exchanged, and a cultural understanding began to blossom between their people. Earth's delegation marveled at her kingdom's bioluminescent forests, its crystalline architecture, and the harmony her people shared with their environment, while her people were introduced to Earth's diverse traditions, innovations, and resilience. In the midst of this diplomatic whirlwind, Alara and Marcus found stolen moments together, brief respites from the weight of their duties. They would wander through the palace gardens under the starlit sky, sharing quiet conversations about the future, about the challenges they still faced, and about the strange, undeniable bond that had formed between them. One evening, as they strolled through the garden's winding paths, surrounded by glowing flowers and the soft hum of night creatures, Alara paused, her gaze turning toward the distant horizon. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I wonder what my life would have been if things had gone differently. If my family hadn't betrayed me, if I had never met you." Marcus watched her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you regret it? Everything that's happened?" She shook her head, a gentle smile touching her lips. "No, it's strange, but in losing everything, I found something far more valuable. I found purpose, and I found you." He took a step closer, his gaze warm, filled with a depth of emotion that took her breath away. "You've changed my life, Alara. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to be by your side, wherever it leads." Her heart raced, a delicate thrill running through her as she looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in his gaze. She felt the truth of his words, the strength of his words, the strength of his commitment, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Slowly, he reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet grounding, a connection that felt as natural as the stars above them. And in that moment, Alara realized that her journey was not just about reclaiming a throne or restoring justice. It was about building a life, a future shaped by love, trust, and the bonds she had forged along the way. The day of their wedding dawned bright and clear, the skies above the palace a canvas of soft pastels, as if nature itself were honoring the union of two worlds. The ceremony took place in the heart of the palace gardens, surrounded by glowing flora and the soft murmurs of nobles, dignitaries, and friends from both Earth and her kingdom. Ilara wore a gown of delicate crystal threads, shimmering with the colors of dawn, her crown adorned with jewels representing both her planet and Earth, a symbol of unity, of the alliance she and Marcus had forged. She felt a blend of excitement and peace, a deep joy that steadied her as she walked toward Marcus, who stood waiting for her beneath an archway woven with bioluminescent flowers. He was dressed in formal Earth military attire, his stance proud, his expression filled with awe and love as he watched her approach. And as their eyes met, Ilara felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This was her choice, her future, a future that belonged to them both, shaped by every trial, every triumph, and every moment of unwavering trust. The ceremony was simple, yet profound. They exchanged vows beneath the starlit sky, promises of loyalty, respect, and love, words that carried the weight of their journey and the hope of the life they would build together. And when they sealed their vows with a kiss, the cheers of their people echoed through the gardens, a celebration not only of their union but of the dawn of a new era. As the night unfolded in a blur of laughter, music, and dancing, Ilara and Marcus moved among their guests, sharing in the joy and unity that filled the air. And as the stars rose higher, casting their light over the gathered crowd, Ilara felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a peace that settled deep within her soul. She and Marcus stood together on the balcony, looking out over the city as it glittered beneath the starlight. His arm was wrapped around her, his warmth grounding her in the present, in the beautiful reality they had created together. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into him, her voice filled with gratitude and love. "For everything." He tightened his hold on her, his voice soft, filled with the promise of all that lay ahead. "Thank you, Ilara, for giving me a reason to believe." And as they stood beneath the stars, two worlds united by love and hope, Ilara knew that their journey had only just begun. Together they would face the unknown, guided by the strength of their bond, the trust of their people, and the knowledge that they were building a future where loyalty, justice, and love would always prevail.